The middle of the 20th century marked a period of profound change. World War II had just ended. The world was recovering from the devastation. From this turmoil, a new global order began to emerge. Former colonies in Africa and Asia sought their freedom. The United Nations was formed to promote peace and cooperation. But a new conflict, the Cold War, cast a long shadow over these developments. This period, from 1950 to 2000, was a time of both hope and uncertainty. The decline of colonialism promised a brighter future for many. However, the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union created new tensions and conflicts. The world watched anxiously as these forces interacted on the global stage. This era witnessed the birth of dozens of new nations, each with their own unique challenges and opportunities. It also saw the world pushed to the brink of nuclear war, only to step back from the precipice. The journey from 1950 to 2000 was a tumultuous one, filled with both triumph and tragedy. Across Asia and Africa, the desire for self-determination burned brightly. The end of World War II weakened the European powers. They had exerted control over vast empires for centuries. Now they faced growing resistance to their rule. People who had been subject to colonial domination demanded their voices be heard. India, led by Mahatma Gandhi, achieved independence from Britain in 1947. This event was a watershed moment. It inspired other colonized people to fight for their own freedom. Across Southeast Asia, movements for independence gained momentum. The Dutch East Indies became Indonesia. French Indochina saw the rise of Vietnam. The struggle for independence took many forms. Some nations achieved freedom through peaceful negotiations. Others endured long and bloody conflicts. The Algerian War, for example, raged for 8 years before France finally granted Algeria its independence in 1962. Despite the challenges, the tide of decolonization proved unstoppable. By the end of the 20th century, the map of the world had been redrawn. Dozens of new nations had emerged, adding their voices to the global chorus and reshaping the geopolitical landscape. As decolonization swept the globe, another force was shaping the future, the Cold War. This rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union had a profound impact on the newly independent nations. Both superpowers sought to extend their influence, often exploiting existing tensions and fueling conflicts. The US, promoting democracy and capitalism, offered economic aid and military support to governments aligned with its interests. The Soviet Union, advocating communism, provided similar assistance to regimes sympathetic to its ideology. This competition played out in various ways, from economic assistance programs to covert operations. The Cold War turned regional conflicts into proxy wars. The Korean War, which began in 1950, pitted the US-backed South against the Soviet-supported North. The Vietnam War, escalating throughout the 1960s, saw the US deeply embroiled in a costly and ultimately unsuccessful effort to prevent the communist North from uniting the country under its rule. The superpowers' involvement in these conflicts had devastating consequences. Millions of people were killed or displaced. Newly independent nations found themselves caught in the crossfire of a global ideological struggle. Their efforts to build stable and prosperous societies were often hampered by the interference of the US or the Soviet Union. The newly independent nations faced a daunting array of challenges. Building a new nation from the ground up is never easy. It was even more difficult in the aftermath of colonial rule. Many of these countries lacked the infrastructure, institutions, and experienced leadership needed to govern effectively. One of the biggest challenges was creating a sense of national unity. Colonial powers had often exploited ethnic and religious divisions to maintain control. After independence, these divisions sometimes erupted into violence. Civil wars and ethnic conflicts plagued many newly independent nations. Economic development also proved difficult. Many former colonies were heavily reliant on the export of raw materials. They lacked the industrial base needed to produce manufactured goods. This dependence made them vulnerable to fluctuations in global commodity prices. Despite these challenges, many newly independent nations made significant progress. They established new governments, built schools and hospitals, and worked to improve the lives of their citizens. Their journeys were often marked by both setbacks and successes, reflecting the complexities of nation-building in the shadow of colonialism and the Cold War. Throughout the Cold War, the world lived under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. The United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a perilous arms race. They stockpiled massive arsenals of nuclear weapons. Each side sought to deter the other from launching a first strike. This created a terrifying balance of terror. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US mainland. President John F. Kennedy imposed a naval blockade on Cuba and demanded the removal of the missiles. For 13 tense days, the world held its breath. Finally, the Soviet Union agreed to withdraw the missiles. The crisis was averted, but it served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of nuclear war. The world had looked into the abyss and recoiled in horror. The near miss of the Cuban Missile Crisis led to a period of détente. The United States and the Soviet Union signed treaties to limit the growth of their nuclear arsenals. However, the threat of nuclear war remained a constant shadow over the world. It fueled anxieties and shaped global politics throughout the Cold War. Section 6. Proxy Wars and Global Tensions. While the US and the Soviet Union avoided direct military confrontation, they waged numerous proxy wars throughout the Cold War. These conflicts were often fought in developing countries far from the superpowers' own borders. They had a devastating impact on the local populations. In Africa, the Cold War fueled conflicts in Angola, Mozambique, and the Horn of Africa. The superpowers armed and supported opposing sides in these conflicts, often exacerbating existing ethnic and political tensions. These wars led to widespread death, displacement, and humanitarian crises. Latin America also became a battleground for Cold War rivalries. The US intervened in Guatemala, Chile, and Nicaragua, seeking to prevent the spread of communism. These interventions often had the opposite effect, destabilizing the region and leading to human rights abuses. The proxy wars of the Cold War had a profound impact on the developing world. They hindered economic development, exacerbated political instability, and caused immense human suffering. The legacy of these conflicts continues to be felt in many parts of the world today. Section 7. The United Nations, a Stage for Change. Amidst the turmoil of decolonization and the Cold War, the United Nations emerged as a significant force in global affairs. Established in 1945, the UN provided a forum for nations to discuss international issues and work towards peaceful solutions. The UN played a crucial role in supporting the process of decolonization. It recognized the right of all people to self-determination and provided a platform for newly independent nations to voice their concerns. The UN also worked to promote economic development and social progress in developing countries. However, the Cold War often hampered the UN's effectiveness. The US and the Soviet Union frequently used their veto power in the Security Council to block resolutions they opposed. This often led to deadlock and inaction on critical issues. Despite these limitations, the UN achieved some notable successes during this period. It played a key role in mediating conflicts, providing humanitarian assistance and promoting international cooperation on issues such as health, education, and the environment. Section 8 echoes of a bygone era. The period from 1950 to 2000 was a time of immense change and upheaval. The end of colonialism, the Cold War, and the evolving role of the UN reshaped the global landscape. The echoes of this era continue to resonate today. The legacies of colonialism, such as poverty, inequality, and political instability, persist in many parts of the world. The Cold War's impact can still be seen in the geopolitical divisions, nuclear arsenals, and unresolved conflicts that continue to plague us. Yet this period also offers valuable lessons for the present. The struggle for independence reminds us of the importance of self-determination and the fight against oppression. The Cold War teaches us the dangers of ideological extremism and the need for dialogue and diplomacy. The UN, despite its flaws, remains an essential forum for addressing global challenges. As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, we can draw inspiration and guidance from the events of this tumultuous era. Section 9 Conclusion. Shaping the 21st century. The period from 1950 to 2000 was a defining era in human history. It witnessed the birth of new nations, the rise and fall of superpowers, and a constant struggle for peace and progress. The events of this period continue to shape the world we live in today. The end of colonialism brought about a new era of freedom and self-determination for millions of people. The Cold War, despite its tensions and proxy wars, ultimately ended without a nuclear holocaust. The UN, though imperfect, provided a vital platform for international cooperation and conflict resolution. As we move further into the 21st century, we face new challenges, from climate change to global inequality. The lessons learned from the past can help us navigate these challenges and build a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world for all.